What are the challenges with green energy? Does the industry have an image problem? What role does hydrogen play in a cleaner tomorrow? Welcome to The Challenge with Green Energy, the podcast tackling the tough questions with the green energy revolution. I'm your host, Lizzie Simon, and in each episode, we will be speaking to experts, leaders, and key voices in the industry to uncover the challenges, breakthroughs, and image issues, and the untold stories that are powering a cleaner, brighter tomorrow. So, what is the challenge with green energy? Let's find out. So in this episode, we're going to be speaking to Wyn Prichard. So Wyn is currently the Director of Construction Skills and Business Strategy at NPTC Group of Colleges. His role is to look at partnerships with bodies in the UK and beyond and to deliver for the sector. Previously, Wyn was employed by CITB Wales for over 14 years, with a majority of that time being the Wales Director and overseeing the performance and strategy of CITB in Wales, in partnership with industry and representative bodies, as well as being involved in a number of Wales Government committees. Wyn has also worked with Wales Government and training and enterprise councils, and he's recently joined Hydrogen Safe as a strategic consultant, where he plays a pivotal role in facilitating introductions and providing advisory support at Hydrogen Safe while they implement their expansion strategy across Wales. So how are you doing, Wyn?
Very well, Lizzie. Thank you very much, and thanks for the big introduction.
It's quite an impressive one.
Well, yeah, that's why my grey hairs exist.
Well, it's brilliant to have you on The Challenge with Green Energy, and obviously to hear your perspective from activity that is going on in Wales, and obviously with your involvement with government, educational systems and industry. I feel like you've definitely got a lot to say, so looking forward to that. But before we get into it, I think it'd be really great to hear about how your career has evolved into what it is, and one that's so heavily involved in green energy. So yeah, over to you.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it, when you look at careers and how they evolve. More than likely ended up and starting the Training Enterprise Council more than 35 years ago now, in terms of skills and training. I'd come from a business background in terms of degree and training, so really there was a synergy, although training and skills was probably alien from business strategy. But working through that and then working with a number of key sectors for Training Enterprise Councils, because although their demise was maybe 30 years ago, they fulfill maybe a very good link between education, government and employers. And you learned a lot more in terms of what employers wanted, as opposed to you giving them skills solutions. So in terms of involvement, I think that was key in terms of my journey through skills. I then ended up doing, at one stage within the Training Enterprise Council, Investors in People, I was the Wales Quality Manager for Investors in People UK, and really looking at the attributes a company needed to reach that standard allowed us to look at beyond training and looking at people's attitudes and people's thinking and way people looked at things. And I think given the sustainability green agenda, and whichever words you use for that now, that was quite critical in terms of how people's views were shaped. So that I did for about 3 or 4 years, and that really, I'm working with major companies to very small SMEs, really give an outlook of what the MDs and what small trade owners looked at in terms of their perceptions of where they wanted to go, and more importantly, how they treated and trained their staff. So again, that was part of the journey, and then obviously working for a non-departmental body like CITB with the levy implications and a lot of policy and guidelines and legal implications of how you work within a scope and government funding regime, as well as the political influence, was another grounding in terms of developing training even further. Really interesting time there in terms of where the levy was going, how the levy was used, how the construction industry, and I think we've touched this more further on in this blog, is changing in terms of what traditionally construction looked like in terms of craft and trade. And more importantly, again, linking again with where we are now, is diversity in terms of where the industry was seen in terms of male domination, and it was a boy or man's job, not anybody else. That is changing, not as quick as anybody really wants it to change, but it is happening. So that was, as I said, about 18 years as strategic advisor first, but then Welsh Director, working very closely with Welsh Government, sitting on a number of panels there trying to shape the future industry. And then I decided to go into college. I was approached to go into the college, in actual fact, trying to slow down a little bit, but it didn't really work out that way. But looking at strategically what colleges needed to do to perhaps be a little bit more aligned to what employers needed. Colleges are very good at doing academic stuff and in terms of delivering students that are skills proficient, but more than likely not industry competent. And looking at how we try to change that barrier. And in fairness, NPTC Group of Colleges was very successful in how it engaged with industry and looked at, beyond the academic routeways, commercial and business training to upskill that workforce. That led, I suppose, in the last 3 years of myself at the college, looking at sustainability, net zero, green skills, whichever way we put it, and how those could be aligned with existing trades and professions, but also looking at how they need to be developed. Because really, if you look at sectors now in traditional sense of the word, they are changing and moving as a mishmash of sectors. And what I mean by that is, if you look at construction, manufacture is taking a very big hold of that industry. Robotics is coming in there. So do we need man-woman power anymore to build buildings? And it's those sort of things. And when we come into hydrogen, it even enhances that debate even further. So things like that are quite key in terms of making the change. And the final thing I would say just in this opening bit is we need to dispel some of the myths and understandings of people ticking boxes to say they're green or people saying they're sustainable. And I think that is key and vital, that we need to educate individuals, employers, and more importantly, I think the future generations, people that are coming through currently, the Generation Z, as they're called, they are more attuned with environmental sustainability issues than people have been in the industry 20 years. And we need to cross that divide, as it were, between it. I hope that's a brief introduction. It might be gone on a little bit more, but
no,
it's useful to pick that up.
I mean, no, it's incredible to hear, really. And I think definitely throughout your career, you've probably seen a lot of this evolution and a lot of this change, whether it be from institutions, whether it be from behaviours, like you said, through to things like funding opportunities as well. So I guess where have you seen the most amount of change in those elements over the course of your career?
It's interesting what you say, Lizzie. Yeah, there's been change. Although if you look at some of the things that are currently issues now, if you call it that, they are things that were there 20, 30 years ago. So in terms of, I mentioned diversity, in terms of innovation, becoming skills and programs, new techniques, they are still issues. We haven't really cracked it in that respect. Having said that, the major achievements I think that we have done, I think we've made qualifications and training much more readily accessible, a little bit more varied. And what I mean by that, and again, Hydrogen Safe is a good example of this, listening more to employers and academics setting the qualifications. So I think we are delivering more industry-ready qualifications and work-ready qualifications than we did 30 years ago. That's not saying that the academic is less important than industrial qualifications, but we need to marry those two. I think we're on that journey. The sad thing about it is that's only been 25 years on that journey, and it is a little bit like herding cats a little bit. There's so many people involved in this process who, whichever way you look at it, or however forward thinking they are, have vested interests to keep their little part of their empire going. It is breaking down. I think the big thing is now is that we are moving away from traditional sectors. I come back to this point I made earlier. Construction, manufacture, engineering isn't a really standalone sector anymore. It needs a lot of other environments. You look at renewable fuels, you look at hydrogen, You look at some of the other energy sources that are coming in and the end of oil and gas potentially in the next 20, 30 years as a major fuel. I think people are realising they've got to change their business model, and that means the company's got to change and the sectors they engage with are different. So I see a change, the positive change I think that I'll see in the next 5 years will be people who will be looking at solution-based responses as opposed to sector-based. And what I mean by that is engaging with people who understand hydrogen, understand sustainability to drive their business, as opposed to looking at what does that mean for an engineering company in terms of sustainability. So that, I think, is the major change. I think the other thing is, I think the upskilling of workforce has definitely improved in the last 20 years. It isn't anymore a female or male foreman going, do this today and I'll train you. There's a lot more creativity about that training and a lot more work going on. And the final one that again, I think has been always a barrier in some subjects has been a careers advice in schools and people understanding what they need to do, whatever career they want to map out. It is very much a given. Oh, you're going to have 5 GCSEs, so you can go to university. You are not going to get 5 GCSEs, so you might as well go get a trade. And I think that has changed now. There's a lot of good engagement groups. We've worked with a couple, Moby, Get Zero, Class of Their Own, who are doing a lot of very good work in schools that are not stereotyping people. And opening up opportunities in there, I think, will change. So my final bit is, I think it is now the change is coming from the bottom up, not the top down. And that's what I've seen in the last 20, 30 years, where a group of MDs who used to control the skills and training, it is much more the voice from below where I want this career, I need to make this happen. And I think the agencies around that are trying to make that happen, Lizzie.
And I think what you were saying before about how for these jobs to be filled, it does need to be led by industry. That is something that needs to happen to understand where the skills gap is. So then it actually creates that career pathway for young people wanting to pursue a career. I remember I listened to a panel discussion that you were on with Business News Wales, where you kind of used it metaphorically of saying there's a jigsaw piece missing from this puzzle for a young person to actually pursue those careers for the opportunities that's being presented within Wales.
I think you're right, and I think you're very timely today in terms. CITB have released their they forecast for the next 3 years of skills requirements, and they're big numbers. But my argument has always been is there are people in skills training in construction. So what is the issue? Is the issue the training is wrong in terms of where the industry is and what they need? Are the industry capable of taking the number of apprentices or upskillers they need to meet the requirements? And 3, are we introducing the right people and the right capability to the sector? And one of my big things, and back to PCS, I've always said there's some very good jigsaw pieces and people do very good jigsaw pieces, but the picture itself hasn't shaped. Now, whether that should be government, whether that should be industry, whether that should be amalgamation of other people creating that picture is still unclear. And we still be sorted by saying there's skills shortages without defining what the skills shortages are and, more importantly, what we should do about it. And again, I'll come back to why I was excited to take a little bit of consultancy with Hydrogen Safe was because that is so focused in terms of skills and where it needs to go, that delivers an outcome for the individual and, more importantly, the industry and the country going forward, as opposed to just collectively saying, here's a lot of figures needed. So I think we need to marry who are in colleges at the moment, who are undertaking skills training, and does it fit with the industry requirements and not where the industry needs to be in a year's time, because somebody starting a college course technically won't be employed for 3 years if they go through an apprenticeship program. What does that industry look like for Wyn or Lizzie 3 years down the line? And it's not the here and now. And that's what worries me, is that we are looking at an industry and a number of other industries that will dramatically change in the next 3 or 4 years. AI is going to have, for example, a major impact in terms of training, in terms of the way we work, and the way industry will address it. Where do we reflect that within skill shortages? We don't. And that, and it's back to my jigsaw bit. We are doing what we need for our jigsaw bit, but that jigsaw bit has to fit into a bigger jigsaw. And if we are not looking at that wider jigsaw bit, numbers mean nothing. And it doesn't really make anybody enthusiastically want to join the sector, whatever sector it may be.
It's actually about understanding what it is that's required. I actually saw an article this morning, I think, and it was saying how in Wales there's going to be a prediction of up to 11,000 construction workers needed to keep up with the demand of net zero. And I'm guessing what you're saying, it's about understanding, well, what is that? Like actually having that kind of breakdown of what construction is a widely coined term.
Yeah, and the other thing as well, if you look construction, I would think construction now is more a dated term. And what I mean by that is built environment. And you look at the environmental factors, the major infrastructure, the capability that has to be built. You take Hinkley Point aren't, I would think, 25% of construction jobs. A lot of the jobs that are going to be created are jobs working the plant post, maintenance of the plant, the engineering side of it. So, construction really, in the main, is a starter, is building the infrastructure. You've still got to manage the infrastructure once it's up and running. And what people don't do that well is join those bits together. And in one respect, you always look at, if a contract's a short contract, how do you manage to get a placement or an apprentice that actually gets somebody through a framework? And that doesn't always work. So I think in terms of numbers, anybody can pluck a number and say we need 2,700 bricklayers in the next 4 years. Really? How can you get that precise? I think if you've got a total figure, yes, I can understand that. But how do you predict what is the need of building a mini hydrogen plant in North Wales? What are the skills needed? That's not catered for. And so I think there's a lot more about project work and major infrastructure work, saying what skills are needed, not just to build it, but actually then to manage it and operate it post-build. So that's my analogy about jigsaws. So if Welsh Government and other people are planning skills funding, they need to look at that effectively as the whole jigsaw piece, not just CITB saying, here's a skills shortage. There's wider ramifications of that, because what happens if we build a hydrogen plant? I mean, with high skilled labour who can maintain it, operate it, service it. There's so much that's got to be thought about it, and you can't say, it's going to be built in 3 years' time. You need those operatives to be ready in 3 years' time. You can't do it, we need them in 6 months' time. You're not going to do it. And I think it's that planning in terms of skills and forecasting, and I think it's where early engagement in terms of the right skills is key.
No, I definitely think so. And just following on from what you were saying about job opportunities, do you think there's also a perception around the opportunities that are presented within the green energy sector, specifically in Wales? Because if we take somewhere like South Wales, for example, there's so many kind of opportunities that are being presented, such as the Celtic Sea Freeport that's creating all these job opportunities. But then at the same time, you have big kind of companies that are closing and causing redundancies, which is potentially causing this disconnect or possibly kind of skewed public perception on the actual kind of opportunities that the green energy sector presents. So I'd be interested to hear that from you.
No, I think you're right, Lizzie. I think one of the things is we all do it, and we all drift into terminology about green jobs, sustainability jobs, net zero jobs, whatever they may be. And really, you've got to look at it. And I was involved in a meeting, got to be 4 years ago, in terms of this agenda was coming forward. This is not new. This is not happening this year. This is 5 years ago. We've been talking about green sustainability in any guise. And one of the discussions was shades of green, pardon the pun, but it was really looking at saying that all jobs will need green element. And what they were saying is everybody will have responsibility as an individual, forget about job, as an individual, and then in a work environment in terms of sustainability, net zero, and how we do that effectively. And what they were looking at was every job will evolve with an element of green. Some dramatically to a point that it could be a job disappearing and becoming totally green because of the nature of it. You can argue with new technologies, a lot of them will become new jobs. The one I've always used is if you take the heating engineer at the moment who fits standard central heating systems. If we go down the route of off-site and on-site and then wind turbines, and we use the point of solar panels, and we look at boilers in different ways, air source, ground source heat pumps, etc. That job is going to drastically change because over the next 10, 15 years, traditional systems will not be used, whatever the new systems will be. So that job will evolve totally into a green job. And then there will be others that will be marginally more greener than they are, but enough that will need training and new skills required in there. And you made a very good point there, Lizzie. If you look at some of the redundancies that are happening across major industries at the moment as we move to green technology, there are opportunities because those skills really are useful in terms of green technology point of upskilling them properly. But you look at it politically, you look at it in an economic sense, we're not very good at putting that message out there in terms of where it fits. So my own feeling is I think we're making, in one respect, too much of green jobs because I think we're all on a journey to a green job. There will be specifics where we need to make more noise about green jobs because they will be strategically important in terms of things moving forward. But I think we're still in a point of deciding what those are because you have got government issues in terms of when are we going to hit net zero? Do we change the date? We're not going to get there. We're not going to do this. There's a lot of political will needed. There's a lot of infrastructure planning needed. But I would say even now that we need to look at green being taught in schools as part of their career choices, whether it be called green, sustainably, net zero. We can argue which terminology is best, but that's one of the things. And that was why I was keen and was involved with the WJEC and Future Generations Commission, that we've created a set of qualifications to go in schools and to individuals based on sustainability, not based on jobs, but based on understanding what sustainability looks like, what we should be doing, and then letting organisations and individuals set what they think that means in their own job. So I think there is a change in terms of the way we teach green jobs. I'm worried in some respects we are bolting green bits onto traditional programs because I don't think it is a competency or training to do something. It is much more of a change mechanism. And I think we need to look at that in terms of change of behaviours, the change of people's roles within it, which in some respects can't be trained. There needs to be, and I come back to my investors in people here, there needs to be a culture within organisations that are saying we are serious about sustainability and this is what it means to Wyn or Lizzie in their job going forward. And to me, that isn't being trained to be an engineer. That is a behaviour change or a mission statement change from a company coming down. So I think there are two bits in here. There is an element of green training, but there's more importantly being a behavioural mission statement change as well.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. I think there is this kind of disconnect for a lot of people that don't think that their role has the potential to become green. But actually, whether you're a lawyer, a chef, a doctor, whatever it might be, all roles are going to have to change if we are to genuinely have that cultural shift and reach net zero. So I completely agree with you.
Absolutely. And I think you said at the very beginning, and I think this is the problem of saying we are going to create green jobs, because green jobs to me is an industrial revolution. And what I mean by that is that jobs are evolving in terms of the world we live in now. And it isn't a job. It is a way a job will evolve to meet the economic government priorities going forward. And I think we've got too many people trying to capitalise on green and in actual fact are doing it a disservice. And what I mean by that, you're going to have people, we're going to make Wyn a green engineer. no, we need to make the company green first, and then Wyn's role will become green because we are green. And I think it's the cart before the horse scenario. So I think we need to, I think we're initiative driven, aren't we? And I think in some cases, this is not an initiative. This is a real journey we're on. And I think that's where, and I'm fortunate to live in Wales, where the Future Generations Commission was set up for 5 years, which is a world first. And some of the priorities it has, in its 7 priorities there, is about that, is about behaviours changing and where the world has to go. And I think we need to monopolise that and actually grasp that as the reason we're doing things. And that links to skills, training, the way companies work, supply chains and everything else within that.
And I think it does very much so seem, from what I've been reading online, obviously meeting with you, that it does seem like Wales is a few steps ahead in terms of kind of getting things through. Obviously, they're kind of it's a country where there's so much innovation happening. There's so many initiatives. What do you think Wales is doing right? What are we doing? What are they doing?
I think the key thing with Wales, I think the first thing to say, we've got a devolved government which has got an element of power and legislative power that is beyond UK. We have been fortunate, and going back to the very early days of people like Jane Davidson, Carwyn Jones, and other people have come in as ministers and either first ministers as well, who have been fundamental in driving it forward. They've taken brickbats for it, and they've had to fight with conviction to get to where they are. But I think their vision and passion and actually driving ability, beyond them being politicians, has actually ingrained it within the Welsh environment. As I said, the Future Generations Commission, which was, I think, 5 or 6 years ago, might be a little bit more, that was set up by the minister, is world beating, and people are looking at Wales in terms of what's that mean and how it works. And I know they've hosted UN conferences and other things on that. The other thing as well, as opposed to working with ministers in London, I did that with CITB as well, they're approachable. So you are able to get to a minister and put your view across. Not always will they agree, and that's their role and that's the decision they've got to make. But there's an openness in Wales. There's an openness to listen. There's an openness to respond. You may not always get the answer, but I think that is key. And if we get communication and collaboration between government, industry and individuals, you get success. I'm not saying Wales has got anything right. It hasn't. I don't think it is an example of a country in the world that's got anything right. There's been some leading initiatives coming out of Wales that have been followed up across the UK and beyond, where they have thought things through a little bit more. And I think that's because they're able to create small, knowledgeable groups that work there. You can see they've done the same with net zero now currently, where a small group, and it isn't a big department, the skills department there, and a couple of people have driven forward a net zero action plan. And that's through a small group they invited to be involved, but down to some very hard-working individuals who are in the Welsh Government and a minister that sees the value of it, creating a plan, which was done relatively quickly for a government organisation. It was really done within 6 months. And it's down to the individuals that got involved, the way they drove it, and the way they set the deadlines. And I think that is something that is more than likely due to the size of Wales. Wales is the size of Birmingham and the Midlands, if you look at it in terms of a devolved government. And I think it's where devolution, perhaps in the English regions, and looking at where there's a difference between north and south, mid, wherever it may be, can be harnessed a lot better. And I would like to see how the devolved administrations within the mayorships within England will start looking at Wales and saying, well, how can we do this a little bit differently in terms of how we approach it beyond UK government? And in one respect, perhaps small is better in terms of solutions, because they, each region, and you look at England, they've got different challenges. Scotland have done some really good work as well within net zero, and praising the Celtic work there. But again, that's been down to approachability. And more than likely, in one respect, they're much more clear, although it has fuzzed a little bit in terms of recent announcements, a clear direction of where they want to be in 2050 in terms of green environmental.
That longer term goal.
Yeah. And I think in some cases, it's been the right thing to say as opposed to the right thing to do. And what I mean by that is then there is no drive to do anything underneath it. We've made the statement, and by the time that happens, we won't be in power, so it doesn't make a lot of difference. But if you've got the people with the commitment, because it is, and we've seen it currently, and you take hydrogen as a good example, you will get negative social media, you will get people that will throw arguments why it shouldn't go down that way. But if you've got robust ministers who are given the right data, the right information from the industry, or who have the will and courage to push that forward, you tend to get results. And we've been fortunate with a number of ministers and officials within Wales moving that forward. There's a very good new skills minister, Jeremy Miles, who's come in, who I've worked with across, and the college I've worked with over a number of years, who's got the right attributes and the passion to get things done and prepared to move that forward. There are other ministers there as well, but that's the key to me. If we can get the right ministers in place who go beyond what you do as ministerial role and work with the right people, you get results. And that's what's held up in Wales.
And it seems like what you're saying is collaboration is key. It's kind of that classic thing of just working together to be able to have a shared outcome and that longer term goal.
Absolutely, Lizzie. But I think, again, we're into terminology very much like green. Collaboration is always thrown, and I've done it in this podcast. It is collaboration with meaning and impact. You know, I've sat, as well as I've sat on very positive groups, and you might have been the same as me, I've sat in some groups and sat on there for 2 years and we've not moved anywhere. If anything, we've moved backwards. And it is the right collaboration. It is the right set of aims and objectives being put in place with a timeline, with the people who can add value to that delivers. There are too many times, we get a group together. You know, we've heard it before. Wales used to be famous to be run by committees. And that the danger is with that, you get the same people, same ideas, and we're all guilty of it. We've all come from different backgrounds. We've talked about my background. You've got a similar background. Is we come back from things we've learnt, and in some respects we revert to type. So we get offended if somebody's saying something different to what we believe in, as opposed to listening to that. And I think that's the important thing, is collaboration with the right people who are open to change, and more importantly, as you said, very time bound and very key objective outcome. Because you know and I know, and there are examples of which I won't name them, that groups and organisations that have been around for 10, 15 years are still spouting out the same things they did 15 years ago, haven't moved on. That's no criticism of them. They might be quite right. They might be me as wrong. But I just think that if you're still doing the same things and churning things, at some point you've got to question yourself. If you take skill shortages, for example, it's all very well CITB or other organisations putting out, we've got skill shortages. But CITB have been around since 1964. So what have you really done then to change it? If you're still saying there's problems with the system, you've had over 50 years to put this right. Why has that not happened? I'm not saying it's all CITB's fault, but things haven't happened. And in some respects, you need to be critical of why those things didn't happen. And we're back then to positive collaboration. Because all very well, you know, you take diversity. You take diversity in a number of sectors. That has been an issue for 30 years. Or even longer than that in some respects. And all initiatives have been some very good initiatives. And I've been involved with some. I was involved with Chwarae Teg, which is fair play in Wales, did a lot of work in diversity. And did crack some sectors, did really make some positive contributions in some sectors. But we haven't made the big hit. We haven't created the major wave in a number of sectors we should have. And I reflect on that. And is it because we've pulled ourselves back from the brink? You know, sometimes you need to be unpopular to make change. And, you know, being unpopular isn't a nice place to be. And you can see it in terms of government announcements as well. But at some stages, you've got to be committed and push that through. And I'm back to you, a very good point about collaboration. If you get the right collaborators who are committed, and that's happened in Wales in a couple of initiatives, you can drive that forward.
So, as a way of tackling quite a few of the misconceptions that exist within the green energy sector, what we've decided to do within this podcast is a little bit of a game of fact or fiction. So,
Okay.
what I'm going to be doing is saying a statement to Wyn, and then he'll have to say if he thinks that that statement is fact or fiction, and then I'll talk a little bit about what the statement is to hopefully demystify it. So, are you ready, Wyn?
Yes, I got fourth friend as well, just in case I need it.
Okay, so the statement is the sun burns hydrogen. Is it fact or fiction?
Well, it's fact, but it basically, from my understanding, going back to my science days, it fuses hydrogen atoms to make helium. So in terms of the sunlight is caused because of hydrogen. So it is a hydrogen refinery, for want of a better word, or a hydrogen maker. But it is helium it produces as well as hydrogen. So I would say it's fact.
So you're halfway there. So it's
Okay.
actually fiction in a sense that the sun doesn't burn hydrogen like a flame
yes, fair
would
point.
burn wood. So people always kind of say that the sun burns, but it actually doesn't. It does what you just said, which is
It's
actually,
fusion.
it does a process known as nuclear fusion, which is a process of when hydrogen atoms are forced under pressure, which produces helium. So you're totally right, and then that process is what causes energy and therefore heat, which obviously kind of heats the earth, and is why we're here today. So hopefully that's a little bit of a myth buster.
It is. That's good. That's a good one. It goes back too many years to remember now, to go back to your science days, isn't it?
You were 80% there, so it's
Yeah, fair enough
fine.
then. I'll take that.
So, in line with our business motto of connecting the supply, something else that we're doing in this podcast is to ask our guest a question that has been asked from our previous guest. And then, Wyn, you'll be leaving a question for the following guest as well. So, the question that you have been asked is, how do you or your organisation plan to meet carbon neutrality in the future?
It's a very good question, whoever raised that. I think the first thing you've got to look at is how you don't go for the headline first, because a lot of people create plans to create carbon neutrality. First thing you've got to know is what you're doing already. So the organisations I've been involved with or worked with, the first thing that we need to have is a very good diagnostic assessment tool of where you are first, in terms of what you're doing, because there are organisations out there, I would suggest, that are doing things towards carbon neutrality and have got some very good mechanisms in terms of carbon that don't recognise they're doing it. So the first thing they need to know is, what is their carbon footprint looking like? What are they doing currently to address that? And then build a plan. My straightforward answer is the danger is, don't create a plan without knowing where you are first. So you've got to know, what the destination is and where you can realistically exist. Some companies will never be carbon neutral by the very nature of what they do, but where is the best they can get to? Is it 85%? Is it 90%? So I would say the organisations I've worked with is getting a good plan in place, knowing what you're doing well, and more importantly, put some very good hard outputs in terms of a journey plan for the next 2 years. And just don't say you've done it without reviewing it.
Thank you. And I want to focus a little bit on skills as well, because obviously I know that is something that you're really passionate about. And I have also recently understood that you're also quite passionate about the AI tools that are planned for the future in terms of kind of delivering skills on a regional but even global level. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Funny enough, I've been fortunate enough with the college to have gone out for 2 visits to India. And some of the work they're doing there on artificial intelligence and AI is amazing in terms of potential. I think the big thing about AI is the way you can kept up to date much better than traditional systems, and using the training and obviously the way you can be trained in different languages. It can be very, very effective in terms of how it can be utilised, in terms, especially training and simulating things that cannot be done due to danger impact. For example, if a hydrogen leak happened, in terms of how you deal with that, you can't put that in a practical exercise in a college or in a training environment. But within an AI simulation, very much like a test pilot in terms of an aircraft, you can simulate all that scenario and let the candidate do it. And I think that is where AI comes into it, in terms of really focusing scenarios you would never be able to train, the what ifs. I think working in collaboration with traditional training methods, I think AI will be a very valuable tool. I think that there are dangers. I think there are some caveats that we know and you see in the press, that it needs to be managed effectively and controlled in some respects. But there are some very strong positive aspects. Working with the right companies and the right collaborations, AI could have a major impact in terms of the new skills training we need. Because a lot of this is, you can actually create, and I've seen it with a company working in India that have created plants of the future in terms of manufacturing plants that don't exist built at the moment, but then stimulate and simulate situations where employees can see this new culture. So I think that's where it needs to be used, but it needs to be used, and back to your words again, collaboratively and working together within that environment.
Yeah, and I think definitely if we're thinking about it in colleges as well, and the usability of AI there, for a lot of young people, classroom settings aren't always the most efficient way of learning. They might be kinesthetic learners, whatever it might be. So having an AI tool to be able to guide them through it could really enhance a lot of young people's learning experience within schools.
And I think, again, the other thing is, and it might be one of the few positive things about COVID, like we are doing this podcast now, online learning and actually not classroom learning has become more common. And I think it's how we enhance that. And AI, I think, has a key role in enhancing that. And the other thing is, although it is costly to develop AI solutions, because it's very new technology, you look at the buildings within colleges and even universities, you can't build much more in terms of the site they're on. It's costly to redefine or retrofit the site to meet a new industry's requirements without a lot of backing from that particular industry. But you could then look at creating AI modules that can work with that industry at not the cost of putting a new building in place. So there's a lot of strategic thinking here that would be attractive, I think, to boards of colleges and universities, and I think to industry, because one of the big things that we haven't even talked about, the elephant sometimes with industry, is if Wyn and Lizzie want to be trained, that means they're going to spend a day a week in the college, and I won't have them for a day a week. Wouldn't it be good if we could do a half-day AI training in their company where they still got a half a day productive there? And I think that's, again, back to evolution of where training might go, Lizzie.
Fantastic. Well, it's been so exciting to have you in. So that brings us to the end of the episode. But yeah, thank you so much, Wyn, having your insights in kind of what's been happening in terms of changes, what the plans in the future might look like. It's been really, really lovely having you in. So thank you so much.
Delighted. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for listening to The Challenge with Green Energy, brought to you by Hydrogen Safe. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, like, and leave a review. Every time you do, it helps us to promote our podcasts and increases the chances of others finding the show too. For further details on Hydrogen Safe and how we are connecting the supply between businesses, individuals, and educators through our specialist hydrogen safety training, then head over to hydrogensafe.org and subscribe to our newsletter. See you next time.